the roundtable is called Empowering Sustainable Finance. It will include Jean-Jacques Barberis, Head of Institutional and Corporate Client Coverage at Amundi, Pierre Ducret, who's the Chair of Finance for Tomorrow and Special Advisor for Climate to Caisse des Dépôts Group, Philippe Heim, Deputy CEO of Société Générale, Philippe Leroux, CEO of the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank, Hiro Mizuno, Executive Managing Director and CIO for GPIF in Japan, and this is a discussion moderated Swaha Patanek, Global Economics Editor of Reuters Breaking Views. Please welcome them to the stage. Come. Please, could the next panelists make their way to the stage promptly? I'm sure they're in the green room, which is just in the basement, and so just a few minutes for them to come up on stage. We'll find out what's going on. Please hold for a minute. Attends les panélistes. Jean-Jacques, qu'est-ce qui se passe?
Thank you for waiting, ladies and gentlemen. We're just getting our panelists up here.
Jean-Jacques, pourquoi tu quittes la scène?
Hello?
Jean-Jacques, pourquoi tu quittes la scène? Bah oui, c'est Studio Gabriel. C'est là-bas, et c'est où le...
I don't know. Here we go. So, great.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for your patience. A bit of confusion, but I think it's all sorted now. We're about to resume with this Empowering Sustainable Finance Roundtable. Take it away.
Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Swaha Patanek from Reuters Breaking Views, the commentary division of Reuters News. I'm joined by a super panel today, very, very diverse points of view. Let me do a quick round. Philippe Heim, who is the Deputy CEO of Société Générale. Pierre Ducret, Chair of Finance for Tomorrow, which brings together public and private actors who are focusing on sustainable finance in Paris. We have Hiro Mizuno, who is the CIO of Japan's Government Pension Investment Fund. It's the world's largest pension fund, and it has $1.4 trillion under management, give or take. And to my left, I've separated the two Philippes out. So we have Philippe Lehuero from the Chief Executive Officer of the IFC, a sister organization of the World Bank. And furthest to my left is Jean-Jacques Barberis, Head of Institutional and Corporate Clients Coverage at Amundi, Europe's largest asset manager. So let me kick off a very quick round. First, gentlemen, I'll start with Philippe to my furthest right. What is your institution or sector doing to promote green finance, and what do you think are some of the key things that need to be done next?
Yes, thank you very much. I think that the first element to mention is that as a bank, we have seen a growing awareness about those subjects in the past years, and the fact that climate risks are seen now as real financial risks. It's the first and foremost element. Not only, let's say, the physical risk, but also a true financial risk through, for example, stranded assets. The fact that assets we can finance become obsolete and should be replaced. And so we have now, let's say, figures on those risks, and specifically in the energy field, it could be estimated between 1 to 4 trillion euros of, let's say, risk specifically for the financial sector. So this is something we need to incorporate when we build our strategic plan. So as far as our concerned, I think that we as a French bank, we as an international player, we have decided to amend our policy and to incorporate, let's say, elements so that we comply with the COP21 objective. And on very specific elements, I can mention the fact that we have reduced significantly our exposure to coal, for example, for coal, the fact that we any longer finance new projects, and the part of our exposure to coal in all electronic projects is now less than 20%. Then also we have an objective to finance up to 100 billion euros of positive impact finance projects through green bonds or project finance. It could be, for example, a project we discussed this morning with Philippe, a common project with IFC and the World Bank, a power plant in Cameroon, providing 30% of the country needs in electricity. And we have also many other initiatives. For example, in crowdfunding, we bought Lumo, FinTech, to collect, let's say, and to channel crowdfunding to green projects. So in many aspects, we are committed, let's say, to this change.
Yeah, would you like to follow up from your perspective?
Well, thank you. You know, Finance for Tomorrow is a collective initiative of the Paris Financial Center. And we have been launched 2 years ago as a branch of Paris Europlace to give to sustainable and green finance, to make it a real driving force of the development of the Paris Financial Center. We gather 70 members, banks, insurers, investors, asset managers, but also advisory firms, think tanks, NGOs, and so on. And we have a close link with the academic community. In fact, we are gathering the whole ecosystem of green finance in Paris. And we have also, as you said, a real private-public identity. For example, the two main ministries, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Ecological Transition, as well as the Banque de France, are members of the boards of the initiative. And that's a very important point. And they contribute, of course, to this platform dialogue, permanent dialogue platform, which aims at mainstreaming green and sustainable finance. And that is to say, having a permanent dialogue, monitoring, stimulating innovation, developing new projects in fintech for green, education, research, and so on. We have a flagship event the Climate Finance Day, and it will be the fifth edition next November, the 29th of November. And last week, just to finish on that, last week the whole Paris financial community released a new collective commitment. It was the second one after the first one, which was in 2015, which clearly collectively commit to contribute to the net zero target by 2050. That means that we have to gradually align on this goal, even if it's not that easy to see what is alignment. It will be one of the topics of the next CFD, but as gradually, but as soon as possible, and building on existing individual commitments on coal exit, we commit to help all of members to adopt coal strategies, coal exit strategies by the end of next year.
Well, thank you very much. And I would like to thank you for Paris Europraise and generally French for your leadership in a sustainable investment. The Paris all of a sudden became much most frequent travel destination over the last 18 months. And, you know, despite the fact I have my daughter studying in the UK, I ended up coming to Paris more. So it's an endorsement of my, the Paris standing, stepping up as the global center of the sustainability finance, which I really appreciate it. GPF is the pension fund manager of the Japanese public pension fund scheme, and we are probably the biggest asset owner in the world. And we have a very well diversified global portfolio. That is because GPF decided that as a universal owner, we should pay more attention to make the whole capital market more sustainable than trying to beat the market or trying to beat the competitor. You know, the conventional wisdom of the asset management is your raison d'etre is to beat the market or beat your competitor, meaning deliver alpha. But GPF is one of the few asset owner started advocating we pay attention to the quality of market beater, which is market has to be sustainable to make our portfolio more sustainable. Because given our size and our diversification, we just cannot hedge away from any systemic risk, including climate. So we made it very clear, regardless of asset classes, $1.4 billion worth of your portfolio should integrate ESG factors, E, S, and G. And climate is not only the sustainability risk, in my opinion, there's another sustainability risk in the social area. And the governance is something which is secures the corporate executive can focus on a long-term strategy, because most of the ESG risk, including climate, probably wouldn't affect the bottom line of the company during executives like the tenure. That's why the governance is important to secure the executive can focus on long-term strategies. And at the same time, by focusing on ESG, investor can support corporate to tackle those kind of long-term issues. So we basically advocate 100% of our portfolio should integrate ESG one way or another. So as GPF outsourced the most of our portfolio to the external money managers, we request all our asset managers to integrate ESG into their investment. And recently we redefined our definition of ESG integration, which is systemically incorporate or include the ESG factors into investment analysis and investment decision. Because we heard a lot from the asset managers that we use it, but we don't use it for decision making. So it's not good enough. And then we can talk a little bit about the green bond later, because recently I was quoted in a kind of controversial way on a green bond, but we made it very clear, we regard investment into those like a green product or sustainability ESG product as a direct methodology of ESG integration, right? And so we approach on one level, we basically demand the ESG integration across our portfolio. And the second, we do invest into ESG product, mainly to promote the concept as well as the send a strong message to the market. So almost instantly after GPIF announced that we are making investment into 3 Japanese equity ESG indices, we observed a huge pickup or momentum from Japanese corporate and asset management industry on ESG. So we now have 5 ESG indices and with the $30 billion investment invested behind those indices. And also we launched the other green bond product together with the IFC and IBRD. And recently, as you probably heard, that we announced the EIB also joined that partnership to promote the green bond investment with us. So we do directly invest into the green product, as well as we just advocate for the general inclusion of ESG factors into asset management businesses.
I'll make sure we come back to the controversial comments in a moment. But Philippe, you come from a multilateral organization. Would you like to just perhaps tell us from your perspective what is the next step?
Well, first, what do we do? Because I think it's important to. The IFC is part of the World Bank Group, but we work with the private sector in developing countries. So that's, for those that don't know, so that's what we do. So we're not active in rich countries by design. But what we have done over the years is, first of all, maybe I will say standards, second, advisory, investment, and funding. So on the standards, we have been the first one to with a number of banks to put some ESG standards on project finance back in 1998, and then it was the Equator Principle in 2014. And this is 80% of project finance now follow this Equator Principle, which is the ESG performance standards of the IFC that we have developed over time. But that is kind of do no harm, which is a big step forward. It was a big step forward. We have also participated to the establishment of the standard on the green bonds with the International Capital Market Association, together with our colleagues from the World Bank, EIB, BRD, and others, who are the founding father of those principles. Why? And since then, it has been a great success because the first green bond was floated in 2007, I think, but it stagnated. Then the principle came, and in 2014, and between 2014 and 2018, the market went from 10 billion, peanuts, 270 billion, still peanuts. And this year, we're on target to go to 250. But if you look at the growth, I mean, this is, again, maybe the glass is half empty, but it's filling very quickly. And that's thanks to the standard. It's like when you buy a bond, you need to have a rating agency to tell you it's AAA or not. Well, you need to know if it is greenwashing or not. So you need the principles. Now we can decide now on the third-party monitoring and all this, but that's more. And then we have standards on impact investing that we launched in April at the spring meeting, which has attracted a lot of attention and a lot of signature. We have now 65 institutions that have signed and another 50 that are in the process. And for those that have signed, it's on already $325 billion of asset under management. So it's, but that's impact investing. We see that it's a new trend, and we'd like to put the principles very quickly around it. It's pretty flexible, but at the same time rigorous. Then we do advisory. Advisory is very important, and I can come to that later. We have different tools like the Hedge project that goes systematically to an hospital, to a supermarket, and say we can save you 20% of water and electricity. And we have a model to design that. We do it at the city level with Buenos Aires. And sometime, and it generates business for us. And that's kind of very cool. We do a lot of work with the bank in emerging country because we also now buy green bonds from emerging markets, from the banks directly. But to do that, it's a lot of work. I was in Jakarta about a few months ago, and it took us 2 years of work with one bank to review the whole portfolio and then to set up the whole system to make sure you don't have greenwashing. But it's a lot of work. So 2 years of advisory before we were able to to help them float their first green bond and be the anchor investor. But we do that in Colombia now, in Philippines, and in other countries. So that's another way. And then our direct investments. Last year, 34% of our long-term commitment, yearly long-term commitment, was climate-friendly investments, up for 17% 3 years ago. So it's a big push, and that was part of the negotiation, by the way, on our capital increase. So it's a win-win for us. Then we have policies. First of all, we went to our board and said that we will now, because we invest in equity and debt, and when we invest in a bank, we put a condition that the bank will green its portfolio and get rid of coal. Not from one day to the next, but over a schedule, over a time period, to go from 50% of their energy portfolio to 20 or whatever. So we basically invest in equity, but conditional for the banks in emerging market. And then we have carbon pricing for all of our projects. That's kind of the policy. And then I can see in your eyes I'm taking too much time, but we do the funding, and I'm very happy that Eurosan just bought some of our bonds, but we did about 10 billion over the last decade.
Jean-Jacques.
Yes. No, thank you very much. I share a lot of the things that have been said before, so I'm not going to repeat them, but to quote the French words used by Hero, ESG is reading in the raison d'être of Amundi since its creation. I'd like to focus on one thing where I think our contribution is important and shall be more and more important in the future, which is innovation. Most of the time when I'm in a panel with a Hero, at some point in time it is said that the asset management industry is extremely lazy and that there are things that we need to make, let's say, our homework to be in capacity to deliver what we say. And I think on innovation, that's really the responsibility we have. Innovations on different things to meet the challenge, and notably the climate one. First on products, because we need somehow some channels between the investors and the energy transition financing needs. And for one of the things we did, notably with Philippe, was, for instance, creating a fund to really start to kick off the green bond market in emerging countries. But we need these kind of channels to make the bridge. And I think that's one thing we need in terms of innovation. The second thing we need in terms of innovation, and that we're completely committed to, is what I would call intellectual equipment. These are complicated issues on which we need to be humble, and we need to be intellectually equipped to tackle them. I give one example. We launched last year an initiative through one of our subsidies, CPR, which is a 2-degree Celsius fund, meaning we invest into companies depending on how they comply with the 2-degree Celsius trajectory. We do that in partnership with CDP. It's not easy, but it's part of our job to provide that kind of intellectual equipment. And the third thing on which we try to be innovative at Crédit Agricole Group's level, for instance, it's also on governance. So, for instance, the climate strategy that has been announced by the group 2 months ago, and that is completely in line with the commitment that Pierre Ducret mentioned at the place at whole. We will have a dedicated governance, an independent audit by a third party to make sure we comply with that kind of plan. And I think also it's an innovation in terms of governance to showcase what we deliver. If I have one challenge ahead, because I think that's what your last question, and maybe to open the discussion to controversial questions, for me, if there is one challenge, it's scalability. It's how do we make sure that there is scalable finance facing the challenge. For the record, to meet a 1.5 degrees Celsius trajectory, if possible, the total budget we still have to do that is 770 gigaton of emissions. We issue 45 every year. So it gives you the amplitude of the challenge that we also have. Of course, it's first, I would say, energy policy decisions that will do large part of the job. But on our side, at the financial industry level, the true question is scalability. And for me, there are 2 answers that we try to do. One that was mentioned by Hiro, which is the mainstreaming of ESG within all the portfolios, using it actively. And that's a commitment we took to deploy that until 2021 in all the strategies that we do at Amundi. That's one thing. And the second thing we should do is leveraging. And leveraging notably on public finance that can be used. And I think that's a way forward also to meet the scalability challenge.
Let me kick it back to you, Hiro, given Jean-Jacques has very kindly opened up the avenue. You were quoted recently in an interview saying that there is a risk that green finance, green bonds specifically, become a passing fad. Now, I think perhaps you were talking more about some of the hurdles, the challenges. Could you perhaps just touch on a couple? And I'd also like to bring in Philippe Heim, who also perhaps has some views on this.
Sure. Actually, I was looking for this kind of opportunity because I received the hundreds of emails saying like, "Did you change your mind? Now you're not supporting the green bond." But in reality, what I try to convey through that the FT interview was, you know, GPEF obviously support green bond market. That's the reason exactly why we build up the partnership with the other, you know, IFC and IBRD and EIB. But what I tried to say was there's still the risk of green bond ended up as just a passing fad. The reason why there's several hurdles which has not been addressed yet. And the first one is the debate on the green premium or pricing has not been addressed yet. So we are now in a situation where we are trying to build up demand for green bond, and the more demand bring the price up, and then the other investor cannot face it, and then they just trying to bring the yield back to the vanilla bond level. So this is a dilemma we need to address. And then and the second point is I tried to make was we actually really cannot find the real benefit of the green bond from issuer's perspective yet. Because issuer now think it's still complicated and cumbersome and also the costly of the borrowing, while the investor cannot appreciate any like a financial benefit of it. So that's why I called it that it's still a lose-lose product. And that is not because I try to discourage the people doing that investment. It's actually trying to just raise, these are the issue. Without solving those, we have a risk of, you know, the green bond ended up just a passing fad. That's what I meant. But interesting thing was, you know, the people who are trying to scientifically analyze the green bond pricing, they have no clue at the moment. But at the same time, as you see, like a Verizon of the US, like a telecom company, recently managed to issue $1 billion green bond at the very quite significant green premium. And I called the other several of the broker or like analysts, and they all said, oh, it's supply demand. But at the end of the day, in this industry, in this market, that supply demand matters everything. So if we continue to see that kind of the phenomena, the academics or like us, you know, the investor come up with a logic to justify it. But at the moment, it's not very clear which area which direction we are going. That's what I try to say. So actually, I'm trying to be cheerleader by telling them this is your problem.
Tough love. Philip, can I talk to, perhaps you would like to address the issue from the companies you're helping shepherd through to issuance with green bonds and things. Are some of these criticisms some things you hear?
The first element I want to mention is that the market is very, very active, and this morning we issued a green covered bond, by the way. So we're very happy with that. No, maybe I would like first to widen a little bit the perspective. I mean, our objective should be that sustainable finance should become the norm, should become mainstream. It should be the objective. The issue we may face at some point is that as a financial institution, there is a lack of a real common language among us. Sometimes we are not lost, but lacking of clear reference. Be sure that we are talking of the same things, we share the same referentials. That sometimes, and sometimes, you know, the dialogue we have with NGOs, there is also debate what is a relevant scenario we should keep in our own projection. So this is a concern. And so we need to work on that, and I'm very glad to see that the European Commission is leading the pack with a lot of initiative on this topic. You know, this debate around taxonomy to describe, let's say, the type of sector, the type of projects that are meeting the criteria. even though there are still debate because we need not just describe the sectors or the type of asset, but also the behaviors of companies towards more sustainable behaviors. So for me, this is the real concern is to make progress in that direction, to have shared references and shared framework.
Can I perhaps turn to Jean-Jacques? Let me ask you and Philippe on my left, who do you think is best placed to tackle some of these concerns that Hero and Philippe have raised? Is it central banks? Is it governments? Is it, I don't know, credit rating agencies? Should finance participants take it upon themselves? Who's best level?
No, maybe I think one word on what Hiro said. I think if there is one advantage to issue a green bonds when you're an issuer, it's diversification of your investors base. And I think it's something that is important. The banks in emerging countries, in the green bonds they issued, we invest in, they do that also because therefore by issuing a green bonds, they have access to investors in Scandinavia, for instance, that maybe they wouldn't have access to. Not saying that it solves the whole question, but I think at least it may, let's say, be a sweetener to the lose-lose situation you were mentioning. Regarding the green bond market, for us, I think the key question is really how to expand it. And basically, the whole title of this forum is about the new frontiers. For us, we see 3 frontiers in the green fixed income market at the moment: an issuer one, an instrument one, and a geographical one. The geographical is emerging. I've mentioned that before, but clearly this is what is in front of us. But even at the European level, which is by far the most, I would say, advanced green bond market in the world, at the moment you still face 2 frontiers for sure. An issuer one, this is a market that is accessible to issuers that are relatively big size, sovereign, quasi-sovereign, big companies. So how do you make sure that you give access to, I would say, smaller issuers to finance their energy transition? And it goes with the second frontier, which is an instrument one, which is also a way for this market to deliver more yield, which will make it more appealing for investors. So we need new instruments, new green instruments at European level, green private debt, green securitization, green high yield, these kind of instruments. And to make a little teaser, that's exactly on this subject that we will announce a partnership with the European Investment Bank in 2 hours to come.
Snap. I was going to say that for the news for the people on the floor. Philippe.
In terms of issues for us in developing countries, and especially in the poorest countries, for me it's much more pedestrian. Yes, on the regulator, you need the G20 to continue pushing. You need the G20 to be translated in Basel by the BIS. You need all this. But if you look at the cities, where are the cities growing? Cities produce 20% of the climate gas. So, and they're doubling in emerging markets very quickly. So if we continue the same construction code that we used to have, we're gonna just double, and we can have more green bonds, and we'll have niche. The problem, we're not going to solve this. So we need to have not only the regulation on the bank side and the financial sector, but also construction. Construction can save a lot of energy, a lot of water. Smart agriculture, there's a huge potential. So we need to go beyond finance, and then finance can find it will be more food for the finance side. Now, in emerging country, I have a slightly different problem, especially the poorest. I'm not talking to China and the Brazil, I'm talking about Malawi. Where are the bankable projects? Because a green bond is just a finance. Now, what do you have on the other side? And that's the part of the equation when we need to push, and I'm changing the strategy in IFC to do exactly that, to try to go upstream and to create projects. I'll give you a very quick example. It takes 1 minute. In Zambia, we started a new approach called scaling solar that we have rolled out throughout the continent. But scaling solar is what? You work upstream with the government. So instead of waiting for a sponsor or an investor to come and say, here's a feasibility study, do you want to finance it? What an investment bank will do. What we did is work upstream, work with the government, find a piece of land, which is sometimes very difficult to get, fund the lease. work with our colleague in the World Bank to de-risk by having a purchasing power agreement with the local utility. And then you auction. This is the deal, and we finance. You auction, and we crowded in Lusaka, top companies, one French, one Italian, top companies that will never have set foot in Lusaka, I can assure you. So that's what I call creating a pipeline of projects. Because if we wait, I think 2030 is tomorrow. So I'm trying to shift more and more towards, that's why our new slogan is creating market, creating opportunity, which is much more proactive than just financing and waiting for the good project to come.
Let me turn to Philippe Heim. Banks have come under a lot of regulation. We're still seeing the after effects play out in the banking sector now. Would sort of initiatives such as climate stress testing that are being suggested and things like that we realise it needs to be done, but is it helpful at this moment for the banking industry, and is how it's being done helpful? And Pierre, I don't know if you have anything as well to add on this issue.
I think an element we need to keep in mind, if we step back one moment, is the effect of new bank regulation. And you know that we are converging towards the new norms Basel IV to be implemented by 2022. And there is this concern how it could affect project finance. So for the same time of project, we may need to mobilize more and more capital. So clearly, let's say, if you want to mobilize, to channel financing towards sustainable finance, it may be an issue, because it could be as well affected. That's why it's very interesting to work on those projects of the concept of a green factor. So to apply a discount specifically on the more favorable project in that respect, as we have SMEs factor to help the development of SMEs. Then you are mentioning climate stress test. I think it's important precisely to measure how banks or a sector are exposed to direct physical risk or transition risk. So this is an element to raise awareness and to provide transparency on those risks. That's very important.
Yeah, I would say that there is, since the beginning, there is a kind of permanent dialectic between the commitments of the financial actors and the action of the regulators and supervisors, and that it's a very healthy one. And I would say that the only fact that the supervisors are now beginning to ask questions, new questions to the financial actors, is something very new and very productive. And probably these questions are also creating an improvement of what Jean-Jacques called the intellectual equipment. I mean, the methodologies. We have two main, in my opinion, there are two main problems to solve about green and sustainable finance. The first one is how do we introduce external scenarios, climate and physical scenarios into the strategies? And the second one is how do we introduce also external data into the risk management frameworks in general? Those two issues are very tricky, and in fact it's through the dialogue with the supervisor that we probably will find the right solution, provided and I'm very attached to this point, and Finance for Tomorrow can play a role in that, provided we intend to act on an open source framework. I mean, if we stay with only ownerships methodologies limited to each actors, we will not progress as quickly as we need. So we need standards, we need common methodologies, and so we need to be open source. And for this, the role of the public finance, which is my family, belonging to the Caisse des Dépôts, is very important, because we can, as you said, Philippe, public institution can be very proactive. Whatever they are, I mean, development bank or sovereign funds, they can provide open source methodologies on this and create the rules, in fact.
Thank you. We have very little time for what is actually a very interesting discussion, but let me finish off with a quick round for just a quick one-word answer, perhaps, or 2 words. How many years do you think it will take for green finance to become an oxymoron? We're talking about green finance as if it's something separate. How many years do you think it will take for finance to be, in its DNA, green? Jean-Jacques.
Happy to take the first one. I think at least at Amundi, what our commitment is to make the mainstreaming of ESG, including DA, in the coming 3 years. So at minimum in 3 years, that will be implemented in all our portfolios. For the rest of the industry, I would give a scale of 5 to 10.
Philippe?
I think the climate may dictate the timing. So everything may be stranded. So it's either green or right. So I think that for me, but I'm very optimistic because, I mean, if you think only 5 years ago, this panel would have not existed. 5 years ago, the green bond market was nothing, but below it was 7-8 billion. So I'm pretty optimistic. And now we see more and more banks and in the real sector really, including in emerging markets. So that's what is really interesting. And look at China, it's pushing extremely hard. So I'm pretty optimistic. I think that will make the 2030 for the SDGs.
Cool. Philippe, and we'll take the microphone back this way.
For sure, it will be an exponential curve, so an acceleration. So I tend to share Philippe's view that it should be within 5 to 10 years.
I would say that we have 2 deadlines. Net zero for climate is net zero by 2050. For SDGs and sustainability, we have also a clear agenda for 2030. And so the question for the financial industry is, are we able to align on these 2 goals, to prove that we contribute, given the fact that, as everybody says, finance can do a lot of things, but cannot do everything. And we need also alignment of public policies, as Philippe said, which will accelerate the process. If you allow me just a last word about the risk of greenwashing and so on. In our last, just to say what the Paris Financial Center is doing for that, in the last collective commitment that we launched last week, we have a very interesting mechanism, which is twofold. The first one is a kind of supervision of the commitments from the financial actors together with the supervisory authorities. And the second one is a commitment to launch a project of observatory, which will be driven by the community, the financial community, with a scientific committee, and which will aim at tracking year after year the progress of the financial center on greening, on reaching this goal of alignment.
Thank you. Hero.
Yes. First of all, at the moment, we are encouraging all our asset managers to differentiate based on how serious they are about the ESG integration, the ESG management. So we are still in the differentiating phase. And after that, we will create a momentum. Everybody would do it. And then it will become the normal. And one thing I want to mention about the other taxonomy or like a fear of greenwashing, I really think at the beginning to make these kind of things become the trend and then become normal, we need to encourage rather than punishing or being too stringent. And a lot of time, my friends in Europe take me to your Japanese restaurant. Most of sushi are not really sushi. Sometimes I feel like I need sushi taxonomy, but it's still, it contributed to the global sushi phenomena. So we need a global green financing phenomena. That's why we need to be more encouraging the people to join rather than be too strict on the standard at the beginning. That's my point, my opinion.
Lovely analogy. With that, let me wind up the session and ask you to join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you for a very stimulating discussion.